Hi there, Earth Nation. This is Amanda with the Activated Earth, and we are barreling through this summit. And I am here today with my friend, Kelly Daulton, and I'm going to read you her bio, and then I'm going to explain why Kelly is part of this summit. So, Kelly. So by the time she was 30, Kelly was debilitated and in pain, but refused to accept that disease was her life purpose. Being in the water brought temporary relief from pain, but she couldn't exist solely in the water. Some of us could, if only. Kelly's healing journey led her to Gyrotonic and applied neurology, the most life-changing and powerful tools we have for healing. These tools confirmed her understanding of natural patterns that underlie all of human existence. Kelly has combined her experiences and her educational expertise with the love of movement and nature to guide people towards a lifestyle that fills their hearts with joy, freedom, and fun. Kelly worked in physical therapy for 6 years under the mentorship of Patrice Peterson, DPT, who is also a Gyrotonic instructor. Kelly has experienced firsthand the positive effects of the Gyrotonic expansion system and has eliminated her own chronic pain, organ prolapse, arthritis, and scoliosis. Kelly has been assisting other amazing people to transform their pain into power since 2009. I love that closing sentence about transforming pain into power. And people may wonder, okay, this is all about quantum physics. This is about working in the quantum. What is the reason why Kelly is here? And we have reached a point in the summer where we've talked about a lot of things already. There's an understanding that the energies that we live in, a lot of it is belief systems. A lot of it is what we think is possible. And Kelly, what you did was to decide that what you thought, what other people may have thought was possible for you, just wasn't going to be your reality. And that's why you're here, because you have this impactful system that you discovered on your journey to walking out of the matrix and into the pure quantum field of everything, to discover this system that works with the flow of the body. So what I would like to begin with is just what you know about the body's flow. You know, what was it telling you? What was yours telling you back then that this is a lie, that I have to live like this?
Well, thank you, Amanda, for that introduction and for having me here to participate in this really exciting discussion. I think the answer to that is it's a little bit of I don't know, but it definitely was something that I started cultivating really early as a child. I remember being in circumstances where things were being talked about, and the best way for me to describe it would be to say that a red SOS light, or like a red emergency button, would go off in my head, and I would just say, that's not true for me. How could that be? And that little light bulb, that alert was an internal signal that would pop up, has never led me astray. It is what has communicated with me, and I've listened to it. So when I heard something that did not seem like it was what I knew to be true, and I really can't say, this is the I don't know part. I don't really know. I mean, I led a fairly normal childhood of the 70s. My parents, we ate a lot of margarine and a lot of microwaved meat because that's what Ladies Home Journal was telling people to do. So I did get a lot of outside time. I spent time growing up underneath redwood trees. And so to look at it in that quantum light, they nurtured me. I know because of the time that I spent barefoot on the ground underneath those trees, that was my portal, and that's how I entered the other world. And then when I came back into the the life that was the human being, the red light was always what told me in my head, that bit of intuition that something no wasn't going to be true for me, and I was going to do something different.
The portal of the Redwoods, I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, lots of mischief happened in there. I mean, it was suburbia. I didn't grow up on land either, although now the land calls me. I mean, the land there called me. The Redwoods, they called me. It was part of the Redwood Forest. And when I left them to go to college, I went to school in an entirely different climate than the one that had nurtured me my whole childhood. And I couldn't live without the big trees. And no offense to palm trees, but they did not offer me the same kind of emotional guidance and support that the redwood trees had offered in my own backyard. So I used to go out there and just lay on the ground. I would stare up into the branches. I would climb them. I would always make lots and lots of gooey, mushy things out of plants and leave them until they fermented just to see what would happen. I was always like just mushing up magical potions, and I was lucky enough to have a few friends who were just as mischievous as I was, and we were always putting things together. And then sometimes it would just sit. I was always building forts under there, and it's where I stayed. If I wasn't in my room or in the classroom somewhere, then I was out underneath the redwood trees. So they, even though I wasn't explicitly aware, I know they were bringing me up.
Yeah. So they actually gave you an opportunity to learn firsthand what it feels like to connect with an energy wisdom.
Right.
You call it that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I have found is that you start to recognize like the knowings that come from that place. It's like this, just like for me, it's like oh, and I have no other words to describe it. So is that what happened for you when you decided that you were going to find something that would heal your body?
Well, not necessarily. I think that I've always felt like that I lived in two entirely different worlds, that I'm that edge walker between the two worlds. And the one that, was suburban and public school and regular mainstream medicine and regular mainstream dentistry and all the things that went along with that. That as a child, that's what I saw, and that's what I thought was how I was supposed to be. But I had the other world that was always guiding and supporting me from a different place, from the inside. And that was what I spent, in my dream time, in the time before I fell asleep. I remember being in that world, even if I wasn't, out there physically. My grandparents had a ranch. And so I did spend a lot of time outside cultivating that other world. And so when I started to, when my two worlds would come into friction, and I would hear the energy of the planet and the land calling and asking for my attention as a child, and as someone who wanted to please people, my rebelliousness, a lot of times, I was fearful of having that rebellion cause me any physical pain or emotional pain. So I didn't practice it until there was so much rebellion that I couldn't avoid it. And that came in my later teens. So the two worlds really became too hard to navigate. That duality was too uncomfortable by the time I was about 17 years old.
Do you think that was the source of your physical pain? I mean, that's just a curious question for me now. I'm just wondering if you've given any thought to where your physical pain came from.
Well, I think that that is probably the biggest part of it. I mean, we're told that it's genetic, and even though we know that that isn't true, that our environment is more powerful than our genetics. And so my environment was really full of conflict and physical pain of others. So the examples of the people in my family were really prominent. There was a lot of emotional and relationship dysfunction, as well as a lot of health dysfunction. So seeing that around me made me think at first that that was what was going to be ultimately, that was my reality. And so I was very physically active in my high school years, and that always was very painful physically. I had a lot of just chronic pain issues. But I thought it was normal because the people in my life were experiencing those things too. And everyone else was taking pharmaceuticals and having surgery and doing the mainstream things. And I just got to a point where I thought, I'm too young for this to be happening to me. Like, this isn't what, if we had this be normal in our evolution, the human race would have died out. We wouldn't have been able to survive our teenage years if this is what's happened to us. And I think that knowing that, you know, the land and the energy of the planet is what's guiding all of the creatures upon it, that I came from that and from the universe beyond. And that was what I was created from, and how I was expressing that. When I finally said the buck stops here, like, I'm not going to make what is around, that's not going to be the life for me. I want to do it differently. And I was able to turn the corner then, spiritually, emotionally, and also chemically, physically, throughout all of my activities. So I was able to reintegrate all of those things, whereas before I had been dismembered, and all of the parts that are dismembered are painful. So there's definitely a component of that being part of where the roots of the physical pain came from.
It sounds like what you did was release a victimhood around it and claim your responsibility and your power, that you could be whole and heal.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's one of the things that I ask people when they come in to receive services from me. On my intake form, they need to say, on a scale from 1 to 10, how responsible are they for their own body and their own health? And I don't think I've ever had anybody come in who was a 1, but I did have someone come in who didn't answer the question at all. But most of the time people come in, you know, pretty feeling like they're ready to accept responsibility. But I definitely felt like I had to do this. I had to make the choice. I wanted to. I wasn't going to live the way the rest of the examples were around me, and fully claimed that that identity and that responsibility.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could explain for us now, you know, what is Gyrotonic? What is it, and how did it help you? What was it that that released the pain that you're in?
I think the easiest way to answer that is to just talk about that integration that I mentioned, because it really was the tool that allowed me to be fully integrated again. And because we have in our nervous system, we have multiple different satellites for gathering and information that goes into our brain for processing, and our brain processes it, and then it gives an output, and that's what we do or what we experience. The Gyrotonic covers all of the satellites. So we have one that is a visual and vestibular satellite, and that's not just our visual acuity, like how we see things when we go to the eye doctor and take the eye test on the wall, but it's all the light that we see and the distance things are away from us, and the colors that they are, and the depth that we perceive, and the speed that things are moving around us, all of that, including what's happening out on our periphery that we aren't looking at directly. And then our vestibular system is what governs our inner balance. It tells us where our center of gravity is located, if we're going to fall, if we're upside down. It is our inner compass. And we should know, our brain should have a clear idea of where in our brain map our center of gravity and our midline live. That can get blurry for people. And so that amount of information coming into the brain can be confusing. And then we have a map or a satellite for all of our musculoskeletal movement and our joint reflexes. It's more of like the physical movement component of things. So with a visual, a vestibular, and a proprioceptive map from those three satellites, we also have one that's for interoception, which is all of the things that happen on the inside of our environment. In our body, all our blood chemistry, the food and our nutrition, macro and micronutrients, and all of those things that come together. So for me, Gyrotonic was the tool that I used to get better information from all of my satellites to help improve my brain's processing of all that information. And then I was able to give the output in a way that was safe and structured, because I didn't know how to do that at first. So as a dismembered body, you know, I had hypermobility, and I was good at being bendy, but not much else. And so I needed to have all of those parts know how to integrate again to work harmoniously. It's really like a symphony is a good metaphor, that you have multiple different musical instruments that play in sections. And if they all play separately, it doesn't sound like beautiful music until they all come together in rhythm. And our heartbeat and our breathing are the rhythm. And we have to maintain that. It has to be cultivated, because so much now in our environment, in the modern world, is out of rhythm and out of sync and disruptive for our internal integration and rhythm. So I don't necessarily like using the name Gyrotonic, except that I'm required by my licensing to give credit, who I know deserves the credit, Julia Horvath, as the person who invented this system. He is the person who went on his own healing journey, and he created a movement system that was just the body supporting itself. And it was called Yoga for Dancers at first, but then he was suffering his own debilitating injuries, and he needed equipment that was going to support him so that he could get the range of motion that he wanted without dysfunction or pain. So he built all of the equipment by hand. And the equipment is really different because it allows us to move in kind of an anti-gravity sense. It feels like you're floating, but it also is connecting you to weights. So you have to use your strength in order to move the equipment. And it's very much like having the resistance that you feel when you're in water. So it's water on land. It's really a moving the energy system that then stimulates all of those satellites that our nervous system requires us to use in order to feel that integration. And it did take me some time. The joke in the world of my teaching is that if it takes you 40 years to get to the low place that you are, it will take you 40 years to get out of that. But unfortunately, that's not actually true, because of the brilliance of our brain and the absolute, the reason that our brain is there to guide us is so we survive. The ultimate goal of our brain all the time is our survival. And so we will heal faster than we degraded because our brain is so driven for survival. And that's why it didn't take me another, well, I was about 30. I had gone through my 20s feeling really, really shitty, and came out of that knowing that I wasn't going to have, and then I had 2 children, and childbearing is also something that can debilitate women now in the modern world. It didn't used to, because we had to survive well after we had children. But now our environment does not support the natural carrying and birth of a child. So by the time I was in my later 20s, I was already falling apart, and the kids made it worse. It wasn't their fault, it was my fault. And so putting myself back together started in between my 30s and 40s. And it hasn't taken me that long. I'm not 50, and I'm better than I was when I was 16.
Wow. So I love it that there's a natural pause right here, because this is where I'd like to bring us back around and get some clarity on some things you were describing. So what I heard was several minutes ago was that part of your problem was that the dismembered body, where the body is comprised of these various satellite sections. And if you could describe each of those satellite sections with just what their purpose is rather than the name that they go by. I think that that's going to bring some deeper understanding, because I know I was getting caught up in the names of the various satellites and not being able to correlate what the function of each one was.
Okay, so let's talk about one of, I think my favorite one is just about seeing, because as human beings, the vast majority of what we know about our environment comes from our eyes. So, I mean, think about all the things your eyes do. That's one huge satellite. It's 70 to 90%. And it's all of the things that you see. If your brain sees something, it doesn't actually know if it is real or made up. So we know this about virtual reality, which is why so much interesting is happening in neuroscience and virtual reality. If you see something, even if it is virtual, your brain in its subconscious locked black box, where all it's getting in from your outside through your eyes is that visual information. It doesn't know if that's what your body is physically experiencing or if it's just made up. So that's one. It's just seeing. It's just your eyes. The other part is like a bobble ball, you know, one of those topple toys, the tippy thing with the big base. I forget what you call them, but it's got a big sandy bottom.
Yeah.
And it's round, and it just goes like this.
Yeah, I used to have like a punching clown when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You'd punch it.
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
would, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another satellite.
Okay.
Where are you when you rock over to one side of that toy? If that was your thing, your brain's getting that kind of, and it comes from different sensors. These are all things that you are sensing, right? Your barometric sensors, like how much pressure there is in certain parts of your body. Then the other one is just like, how much can you move? So your brain's getting information from all those joints, from all that, the joints each are hardwired to a reflex, every joint in your body. So that's how you walk. That's how you swing on a swing. And that's another bobble ball in addition. They don't usually happen just one at a time, right? If you're standing and you're using your eyes, you are a functioning human, and that comes with all those other layers. But each satellite may have like more ability or better function than another one. So that's the third, is your dance moves.
Okay.
And then the fourth one is just the internal chemistry and how you sense what's happening on the inside. So we can be led astray by either bad information that comes into our brain, like the virtual reality that's confusing us, or we can be confused by how it's processed and put together. or we can have a bad output. So that's a trip and fall. When somebody falls, and the bad output was that you misread, there was some problem that happened, and then the output was a fall. That would be bad processing, and the outcome being the fall. So those 4 satellites, I think their functions are, there's a lot of sensory detail in that. It's how we feel, but it's how we are physically operating within our environment. And as a human being, everyone has those 4 different satellites.
Okay. So do various different types of out of balance with these different satellites then display as different types of physical issues?
Right. So now we could talk about the body's threat bucket. So all of the information that comes into your brain is going to be, decoded. Anything that is threatening to your brain, somehow confusing, any kind of confusion at all, is going to be stressful, or it's going to add to your threat. So we call it a threat bucket because there's just one container, your brain, for processing whether something is going to threaten your survival or whether it isn't, and you're okay. And you can think of it a little bit about whether it's part of your relaxing side of your nervous system or your acting side of your nervous system. And I think when, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. When we aren't perceiving additions to our threat bucket, when our threats are all really, really low, when we're on vacation, and we're on in the sand on the beach, and we're breathing clean air, and we're drinking fresh fruit juice, and all the things are wonderful, we have a really low amount of threat in our bucket. Mm-hmm. But our brain is registering all the things that are happening under the surface as to whether or not they are a threat to our survival or not. So if we don't mitigate the amount of threat that our brain is perceiving, then at a certain point it reaches a threshold. And if that threshold is exceeded, then we will get chronic pain or dysfunction or illness. And that's the result of not having had the release of the threats in our threat bucket. It all goes into one place. It's not a separate threat for each individual satellite, but that if we exceed that total level of threat, and it's a good thing to think about it like an iceberg. We know we can see this much of the iceberg, but we've got this giant amount of iceberg underneath the surface of the ocean. And your brain is so good at protecting you to keep you alive that you can add lots and lots of threats before you end up with something serious. So our goal is to make sure that we're always mitigating those lower threats so that ultimately we don't end up with that big serious problem. And so I would say that my threat bucket was exceeded when I was a small child. Mm-hmm. And I did not have a lot of capability or the knowledge to lower my own threat bucket. Except when I would go out under the oak trees, they told me that they were going to help me lower my redwood trees, lower my threats in the threat bucket. And so the feeling, that's one of the satellites, that feeling of release and relax on the inside, knowing, and that kind of pervades everything and gives us that greater sense of peace. That's really, really powerful. And it kept me wanting to come back for more. So yeah, I think, does that answer your question just on a level of how they contribute to the ultimate outcome of being dismembered or dysfunctional?
Yeah, I feel like I understand now. And you also alluded to earlier, you alluded to how certain parts of our reality now, what we live in, the kind of society or culture maybe that we live in, is not really resonating with the way all of these satellites are meant to integrate. Can you give us an example of one of these things that maybe it used to be incongruent with our bodies and now it's not? And you
Look
mentioned the whole pregnancy thing, the childbirth.
okay,
Maybe that would be a good one.
sure. Well, yeah, we can go into that as a. I think that it is our movement away from how we naturally evolved on the planet. We live in cages. Really, we're just like zoo animals. We live in a box. It keeps us away from the sun. We have to have sunlight. We don't get enough sunlight nearly, throughout the day. It generally, we're kept out of the fresh air. And when we do have fresh air, sometimes it's full of things, especially in California when we are going through summer wildfire season. We know our air is polluted and full of particulates. So just the fact that if you're not living on the land and you're not able to get out and ground at least part of the year, camping is a great way to do that, to get out of the cage that we live in and out back into nature. If we don't harvest and cultivate our own food, those nutrients, and I think it's, there's a movement professional, her name is Katie Bowman. I think she coined the term vitamin N. I'm not sure if it was her originally or not, but vitamin nature is a real thing. We have to have that or we start to break down. So everything in our modern mainstream world, I think, is in need of mitigation because we're not getting the nutrients on any level that we used to. A car is a threatening space for the human brain because cars have only been around, almost 100 years? Like, the reason that our brain is the way it is because it spent thousands of years evolving on the planet. And we came from all of that information. And now we're trying to stuff ourselves into these unnatural spaces and they're threatening. So then we just need to talk about checks and balances. Can we mitigate the amount of time that we spend doing something that our brain is confused about by doing something else? And I guess that's really the gyrotonic system. Climbing in trees is a great one. Like, fortunately, I was able to go climb in those redwood trees. That is bringing that vitamin N back into that body, that physical participation and all of the things that are required to that. But since as an adult, we don't have very many opportunities, or it might be unsafe because we haven't done it for a really long time, then the gyrotonic equipment is what gave me the complete range of motion and full three-dimensional, very organic movement in circles and spirals, things that are very, very complex.
Mm-hmm.
There is a study as well that I think was very fascinating. They took thousands of people and they looked at what happened if they did 4 different kinds of gym equipment. One of them was a rowing machine. One of them was a stationary bicycle. One of them was an elliptical machine. And one of them was a treadmill. So those are 4 very mainstream gym pieces of equipment, right? They studied the people for 8 weeks at least. I may have cut that short. And they looked at the progress that a person had in weight loss and other biodynamic markers over this amount of time. And the people who worked on the treadmill and the elliptical machine and the stationary bicycle all stayed exactly the same, or they got worse. When they started the study was supposed to make them, they were hoping people would get better, but working on these pieces of equipment made them worse. The only one where people actually improved a little bit was the rowing machine. So without going into like a huge amount of detail on like the neuroscience of all of these different pieces of equipment, you could think about, well, what differentiates the rowing machine from these other pieces of equipment? Why would the rowing machine at least not make people worse? And that is really the essence of why we continue to see more and more chronic disease I mean, without going into the interoceptive side, which is that our food quality has diminished greatly,
Right.
and that people are just given pharmaceuticals when they need, help, rather than any of these other options that we have. But I think those are some examples for you about just how far we've come from what keeps the human body healthy.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. You have had some amazing successes, not just your own. Do you have one or two stories you could share with us that maybe something unexpected that people would have not thought about, body movement or adjustment of these body satellites would actually help?
Well, we can talk about my labels if you're interested, but I do love to tell the story of one of my most dear clients that I've worked with for about the last 10 years. He's now 82 years old, and I've worked with him on multiple different levels over time, and he has ultimately not had shoulder surgery for a torn rotator cuff and has been able to regain all of and more of his strength and mobility with no surgery. He has decreased his consumption of pharmaceutical products so that he's on relatively few things now. He is diabetic, and he did have diabetic neuropathy, and now he is regaining the sensation in his fingers, which is really, really important for the work that he does. He's wanted to maintain that. He's extremely active, and in addition to keeping his diabetes at a minimum and increasing his strength and mobility, he's just happy that he is able to continue to do the things that he loves. And I think what's really worked well in that situation is his dedication to knowing that he can, that it's not impossible, that he's not told any of the things that we work on don't come from other sources. So imagine the gaslighting, like just how people are told that they won't get better. They are old, and sorry, this is your genetics or your old age. And that is just a load of crap, because I love to talk about my success stories with people who have overcome and been able to achieve the things that they want and made their life more full. I'm glad that, for example, my heart is strong and healthy. It doesn't palpitate like it used to. I'm happy that my bones are not leaching calcium, and so that I'm not getting kidney stones, and I am not decreasing bone mass. As I get older, I am not going to worry about osteoporosis. Or I'm also increasing my liver function, so I'm not going to worry about high cholesterol. I had, as you mentioned in my bio, my pelvic floor dysfunction and prolapse. We think that incontinence in older people is somehow normal, and that's just a modern factor that happens because we don't get what we need. And so I wasn't incontinent, but I was having urination urgency and irritable bowel and pelvic floor issues that I have completely disappeared.
Wow.
My scoliosis is functioning so that I have more strength and better range of motion than I have before. My family history of arthritis is non-existent, where I used to have monthly gripping pain throughout my joints in my body, and it's gone. I was told that at the age of 17, I had hepatitis C, and I do not have that, and I do not have the worry any longer that it is going to be a factor in my life. My family history of Alzheimer's and dementia comes from certain gut issues and plaque in the brain that I know that I am able to diminish even though I was raised on margarine and microwaved meat, and I was sprayed by malathion in the
Oh,
80s, you know, all of the things that we do to our environment, we do to ourselves. And so I've mitigated all of that to the degree that I can so that I feel good. And the rest I have to throw to the universe and know that it will just be taken care of, you know, because you can't live in fear, right? So do you want more stories? I could go on.
I don't know. It sounds like you've done everything you could possibly do just for yourself. You know, that it's amazing that you have healed all of these things. I would love it if you have just a nugget of wisdom to leave everybody with today that maybe it's like the biggest deal they could incorporate into their life right now, not knowing anything else.
So many of them are, you know, relatively in this space, maybe not everywhere, but things like making sure that you go out and connect with nature. And I would say that when you're there, nature is acknowledging you, right? You can participate in a conversation with it and it talks back. It's a different language that we have to practice because it doesn't just come fluently the first time we go out there. So if we go back again and again, and what I know absolutely is that when you acknowledge something in the natural world, it turns on a light bulb. This reminds me of the end of the story where it's like, every time a bell rings, an angel gets its
Right.
wings. It's true. When you acknowledge another being, whether it's a rock or a butterfly or a tree or the possum, you know, that's in your backyard, or simply what we need more of too is just acknowledging that spirit in other human beings. There is a connection that happens, it lights up that grid, and it allows for that communication from one world into another. And I believe that people who came before us, at times there may have been worlds who were better practiced at that than we are now in our natural society. And I'm not a global traveler, although I've gotten to do a lot of traveling. And I'm sure that there are still cultures throughout the world where this isn't as foreign as it is to people who live in the modern United States. But I think that that will tell the rest of the story. What needs to come afterwards is up to every individual in participation with that natural force. I'm not sure if that's incredibly, I mean, the practical side of that is just what can you go out and connect with?
Yeah.
And the rest is a practice. It has to be practiced. And of course, we need help from one another. I can't do what I do in my body all by myself. We evolved as a communal species, and we had healers who helped guide us through things that we didn't know how to get for ourselves. And for people who feel like it's out of their reach or hard to understand or scary, then find somebody who can be your guide and help you. Not somebody who's going to do it for you, because people who say that they will do it for you they can't.
Right.
And that's where that responsibility comes from. But you can still find a guide who will help, and you can do it for yourself.
I just want to listen to you all day long.
Aw, thanks.
That was just really magical and beautiful. And I love the way, you know, you injected the magic into nature, and at the same time acknowledging that, you know, you get to practice learning to be a good listener, and learning to hear and understand the language that the trees speak, or the language that the land speaks. So I just wanted to thank you so much for this. This has been really a big inspiration to me, and I hope to everybody who's listening, because one of the things that I really wanted to drive home with this share throughout this week is that we don't have to believe what we're being told. You know, we don't have to believe that once you go down a path of disease, there's no way to step back out of that to health. The body wants to be in balance. And you know, exercise this miracle of listening and discovered, you know, you were able to listen to your body and then found, you know, a template that works, that brought you back to balance. So just thank you so much, Kelly, for being here. And how can people contact you? What's the best way to get in touch?
Well, I want to say one more thing before I talk about the contact, because you just hit on another point, which is, let's weave it back to how the human pattern is the planetary pattern, right? Because all natural systems, their normal state of being is always homeostasis, always that perfect balance. And whatever nature needs to do, nature's going to find a way to create that balance. And so this is where permaculture and understanding those underlying forces that create what we see on the land are the same that drive the human body and the natural state of health in the human body, because it always wants to find its way back to that perfect balance of health. So I call Gyrotonic permaculture of the body, because it is reading the natural patterns that are there, finding out what elements are really good at what they're doing and what's already a resource, and then finding out what are the needs, which is exactly how we do it in permaculture, right? Looking for the needs and the wants and the needs and what you have available to use. And it just so happens that this man, Julio Horvath, who created the Gyrotonic system, is really, you know, so ahead of his time, because now we have neuroscience that is telling us all the things that we know. We're just getting validation from the studies that are telling us. But what he developed in the 70s that is now available to us is really just taking what already happens in nature and encouraging that integration to continue and take us on that path to greater health. And so if I do have a newsletter, if anyone is interested in reading, I have Facebook under Restore the Balance, and Instagram, Restore the Balance. Regenerative Health is the whole title. And I have a website for Kelly Reed Daulton, just kellyreeddalton.com, which is my name. And so my mailing list goes out only about once every month, or if I have special events, I'll send out another newsletter. It doesn't so much have writing in it anymore, because my practice has become critical in working directly with people. So I don't do as much writing, but it does have, you know, different workshops and classes. I can work remotely with people, but I love to work in person. So most of my sessions are in person, but we can do an incredible amount of stuff online. And one of my other wonderful success stories is a student of mine who was too young to have a stroke and did suffer a very life-changing stroke and paralyzed on the whole entire right side of the body, which was the handedness. I mean, everything that they knew how to do happened on the right, and that became paralyzed. And when the pandemic became a thing for people, he was really concerned. And so we continued to see each other online, because it's easier for his family and for his health, and for all of the reasons that that people need to get seen. He's really, really good at doing this online. So sometimes it just works out amazingly, and we can achieve just as much, and sometimes even more efficiently when we work online, because we can do it from far away. But I also love to meet people in person. So my studio is in Atascadero, California. And yeah, it's open for visitors.
Yay. Oh, that was really great. Thank you so much for being here, Kelly. I really appreciate your share today. And I know everybody else out there is going wow right now. So I hope if you hear yourself being talked about here, you get in touch with Kelly and get that taken care of.
I appreciate you and all you're doing here, Amanda, and I thank you so much for being able to participate in this program.
Very welcome. Thank you so much.